John Franzese, nicknamed Sonny, was a legendary figure in the American Mafia. Born at the beginning of the 20th century, he lived into the early 21st century, becoming the oldest mobster in history. Sonny kept ties with all the iconic members of Cosa Nostra and became one of them himself. Fully immersed in the life of a mobster, he strictly adhered to its rules, proving his loyalty on multiple occasions. He is rightly considered one of the most resilient criminals, never cooperating with the authorities, no matter how many years of imprisonment he was threatened with. Sonny always stayed true to his choice without hesitation, which cost him numerous prison terms, eventually spanning several decades. During his long life, Sonny managed to do many things. He had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, the top beauty symbol of the 20th century, and helped introduce Bob Marley to the world. And he also sponsored the highest-grossing porno ever made in the genre. Today's story is not just a retelling of a gangster's life. We're taking a retrospective look at a major part of the history behind the American Mafia through the lens of one man. John Franzese, named Sonny, saw how the older generation rose from bootlegging alcohol, participated in the transformation of Cosa Nostra into the dominant crime organization in the United States during the 20th century, and finally witnessed its decline as it either went underground or disappeared altogether. If you're interested in hearing the story of the man who probably most embodies the title of mobster, then meet John Franzese, a legend on the other side of the law. John Franzese was born in 1917 during one of his family's trips back home to Italy. He hardly remembered that period of his life, as his parents almost immediately moved back to New York City, where he spent his childhood. The author, whose research I based my video on today, claims that John's father, Carmine, stopped his criminal activities by the time John was born. However, Francisco, as I discussed in my video on the birth of the American Mafia, began to recruit members into the Mafia around 1917. If Carmine was connected with crime at that time, he most likely belonged to the Brooklyn Camorra, consisting solely of natives from Naples. In the legal sector, Carmine owned a bar and a bakery. So John's story is not one of rags to riches. He was never in the dirt. But it's also not a story of a father amassing a fortune and then sending his children to the best schools and universities. John did not lack for anything, but still grew up and studied in the usual neighborhoods of Brooklyn, which at that time were not the best environments for raising a law-abiding citizen. John spent his entire adolescence in street fights and even managed to get into some underground fistfights. If you believe his own words, he was an excellent fighter, very rarely losing. It was because of a fight that John was expelled from high school at the age of 14, ending his formal education. According to legend, it was around the same time that he committed his first murder. Carmine, who was a local man, supposedly witnessed his son killing a man in the back room of his bakery. Whether or not this is true is for you to decide. However, John, who I will now refer to by his nickname, Sonny, certainly led a life that would become the stuff of legend. Sonny began to drift increasingly toward illegal activities. His father probably didn't want that for his son and tried to get him a legal job at his bakery, managing one of the floating dice games in Brooklyn. These games were called floating dice games because they were held at different locations each time, making it harder for the police to track down gambling offenders. Around the same time, Sonny was accepted into the Profaci family, for whom he ran the dice games. From here on, I will refer to this family as the Colombo family, as this is the modern name used for them. The Colombo family got its name after Joe Valachi's testimony, where he named the families after the people who led them. Although Colombo was in charge of the family later, at the time of Sonny's initiation, it was still run by Profaci. Sonny's trouble with the law started simultaneously. By the time he was 21, he had already been arrested twice for troublemaking and once for assault. In all three cases, he received no significant punishment. He would go on to have dozens of arrests, and until the 1960s, he successfully dealt with all of them and remained free. Sonny took a brief break from his criminal career only when the US entered World War I, and he volunteered for the front. During his military training in the US, Franzese acted as if he had never left his old life behind. He constantly got into conflicts and fights, and even had a fling with the wife of a major. As a result, just before he was sent to the front, he was discharged from the army as unreliable. Such a violent character would have created unnecessary problems. In the documents, the reason for his discharge was given as pronounced psychopathy, which wasn't far from the truth, considering he had killed many people in his lifetime. Authorities speculated that the number of hits Franzese ordered went over 50. Sonny was a very tough guy with an intimidating reputation, as told by people who knew him during his youth and adulthood. More often than not, just a stern look from him was enough for the other guy to know that fighting was useless. Such a reputation wasn't created in a single year. It wasn't just rumors that he had killed someone or that he was a member of the Mafia. Sonny was careful, making sure that people couldn't even open their mouths with a disrespectful tone in his direction. For example, he once sold a car to a dealership in his neighborhood. The owner of the dealership, when presenting it to potential buyers, joked that they should check the car thoroughly because it was driven by Sonny. Sonny found out about it and took it as an insult. First of all, he lived in a decent neighborhood, and not many people there knew what he was up to. Such jokes could raise questions. Secondly, it was a hint that he could not keep track of things. In the end, the owner of the dealership was beaten up by several guys and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. But I think you already know what kind of guy Sonny was. It was his persona that helped him build his reputation in Mafia circles. By the late 1950s, Sonny was considered one of the toughest. So, when the Gallo brothers revolted in the family and kidnapped several people, he was one of the negotiators on behalf of the family. For those not in the know, in the early 1960s, there was a war between the Gallo brothers faction and the Profaci family. The Gallo brothers were unhappy with the way the family was dividing money and racketeering profits. In February 1961, they demanded more racketeering shares and amnesty for the kidnappings they had committed. Profaci promised that they would get it, but soon after, his men attempted to kill one of the Gallo brothers. The assassination attempt, carried out by Carmine Persico, failed, but it still led to an open conflict. Conflict resulted in the deaths of many people. About a year after the conflict began, Gallo-Profaci died. His successor, Joe Magliocco, continued the war. In my video about Joe Bonanno, I summarized how Magliocco and Bonanno planned to kill 3 members of the commission, with whom they had an unspoken agreement. It was like a Mafia Cold War. Magliocco relied on a man named Joe Colombo, who betrayed him and told the commission everything. Magliocco was not killed but was forced to resign, and his place was taken by Colombo, who was able to finally negotiate with the Gallo brothers and end the years-long conflict. As a result of all this turmoil, Franzese was promoted to captain. For those who don't know, the Commission is a body for resolving disputes in the American Mafia, which includes the bosses of the strongest families in the country. After all this time since demobilization, Sonny not only tried to avoid getting killed in the intra-clan war or intimidate undesirable people, but also built his criminal business network. It must be said that he was just as good at that as he was at killing. From running the floating dice games he started with, Sonny went on to patronize 4 bookies who brought in about $80,000 a week. Sonny provided his bookies with protection from other gangsters and assigned people to recover debts from lost customers. Another form of income for Sonny was unethical loans, which he extracted in a very unusual way. One time, a senior bank employee came to him for a loan after losing a big amount playing cards and urgently needed money. Sonny lent it to him, but in return asked for a favor. The employee had to ensure that Sonny's people got loans at favorable interest rates. In this way, Sonny's loan sharks took money from the bank at 5, 10 interest, and gave it out on the street at 15. The difference went into their pockets, and no one risked their money. Sonny also made money from labor unions. In a suburb of New York called Long Island, he formed a group called the Long Island Barbers. Each member paid a $50 initiation fee and another $10 monthly fee. Most of them joined the organization under threats of physical violence, although Sonny knew how to act more elegantly. He preferred brutal methods, but could be subtle when necessary. For example, to extort monthly payments from barbershops, Sonny's men planted pests like mice, rats, or cockroaches in the shops. As soon as the owner got rid of them, the pests would reappear, ensuring the shop owners would comply with Sonny's demands. This went on for a month, until Sonny took one last step before proposing an end to all the madness. The barbershop owner sent local boys to fetch him coffee every morning. Sonny's men intercepted the boys and paid them to deliver bees instead of coffee. You can imagine the chaos that erupted in the barbershop. The next day, a couple of guys showed up and demanded $5,000 to make it all stop. The owner decided it was better to pay up. Sonny also had a hand in breaking into the music business. He opened a small booking agency and began helping unknown, talented performers get work in bars and clubs in New York. He played a role in launching the careers of Sammy Cooke, Johnny Nash, and a female trio called the Supremes. Sonny also helped introduce Bob Marley to the world by providing the initial capital to producer Danny Sims, who discovered Marley. In addition to the booking agency, Sonny was an unspoken partner in several recording studios, such as Kama Sutra Records, Buddha Records, Buddha Records, and Capitol Records. However, he wasn't the benevolent type who lifted unknown musicians out of obscurity, provided for them, and then disappeared from their lives. It was nothing like that. Musicians were exploited for maximum profit, often squeezed dry and discarded. To achieve this, they were tricked into signing exploitative contracts without a second thought. If a musician discovered the deception and wanted to leave, they were often threatened with violence, such as being hung upside down from a window or hospitalized after a beating, to discourage any attempt at seeking justice. One of Sonny's most unconventional activities included sponsoring the most lucrative pornographic movie in history. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that most forms of pornography were protected by the First Amendment caused a surge in the porn industry. Pornographic material began to be sold openly and shown in movie theaters, while peep shows became immensely profitable ventures. A peep show, for those unfamiliar, involved patrons purchasing tokens from an attendant and using them to view explicit content through a machine. Some peep shows even featured live girls, operating like 20th century sex cam studios. Marty Hodes was a major player in this field in New York, earning staggering profits. Authorities estimated that one of his establishments brought in around $1.05 million annually, equivalent to about $10 million today. Naturally, such success didn't escape notice, and Sonny approached Hodes, asking to become partners. Hodes refused, prompting Sonny's men to resort to psychological terror. They kidnapped Marty's 6-year-old son one afternoon as he disembarked from the school bus, returning him in the evening with a note warning Hodes to reconsider his decision. After the kidnapping incident, which involved Hodes's 12-year-old son, Marty decided to avoid any further confrontations. Franzese entered Hodes's business under strict terms. Marty paid him $100,000 in weekly installments of $4,000 and committed to paying an additional $100 per week regularly. Moreover, Hodas was compelled to open all new establishments in a 50-50 partnership with Sonny. In addition to his involvement in peep shows and the pornography industry, Sonny expanded his revenue streams through credit card extortion, protection rackets, and theft ranging from homes to banks. The 1960s marked a golden age for Sonny, where he amassed considerable wealth, held unquestionable street credibility, and managed to evade numerous arrests, enabling him to freely roam the streets of New York, shop in local stores, and relax in clubs. Sonny was a prominent figure in clubs and bars, with access to elite venues like the Copacabana through the back door. He could sit at a prime table next to famous actors or singers without facing any challenges. His influence was such that celebrities and female sex symbols of the mid-20th century, like Marilyn Monroe and Jane Monroe and Jane Mansfield, would approach him to say hello. However, along with the advantages of wealth, power, and influence in the criminal world, Sonny also attracted significant attention from law enforcement. By the late 1950s, Sonny had risen as a prominent figure in the Mafia. He was known both as a tough enforcer, capable of handling dirty work, and as a successful earner, bringing in substantial profits for his family. Unfortunately for Sonny, this rise coincided with a period when US authorities were intensifying their efforts against organized crime. Pivotal 1957 Appalachian meeting, where key bosses of all Mafia families gathered, and Joe Valachi's 1963 defection and subsequent testimony, which confirmed the existence and inner workings of Cosa Nostra, marked turning points. Valachi's revelations, widely televised, forced authorities to confront the Mafia threat head-on. This sparked a relentless pursuit of top Mafia figures that would span several years. Sonny Franzese quickly became a target for law enforcement due to his frequent arrests. However, these often resulted in minimal charges or witness intimidation, leading authorities to initially view him as just one of many small-time racketeers. Yet, recognizing that dismantling the Mafia required targeting its top echelons, authorities began methodically targeting leaders like Sonny, who was identified as one of the most influential figures in the Colombo family. In particular, with the help of confidential informant Gregory Scarpa, law enforcement intensified their focus on Sonny. They meticulously checked their leads and compiled an extensive list of suspected gangsters with Sonny's name high on the priority list. The authorities went to great lengths, even bugging his house during construction, placing devices in the walls, and regularly sifting through his trash until it was collected. Surveillance was constant, although Sonny skillfully evaded detection when meeting others discreetly and ensured no sensitive discussions occurred at home or over the phone. Despite their efforts, law enforcement struggled to gather actionable evidence against Sonny. He maintained extreme caution in his activities, never discussing illicit business in vulnerable locations. This persistent pursuit did not deter authorities, who redoubled their efforts by arresting associates and probing deeper into Sonny's operations. As the state authorities' scrutiny intensified, so did media interest. Criminal journalists began scrutinizing Sonny, adding to his mystique as a formidable figure in the underworld. This heightened attention created an aura of notoriety around him. Francis ultimately had to confront the reality of his situation. When would this all come to a head? Of course, before diving into the trials, let's backtrack for a moment to the 1930s. Future mob boss Vito Genovese attempted to orchestrate a murder in a way that would shield him from suspicion. According to reports, one hitman was supposed to kill another hitman, making the plot incredibly complex. However, the plan was exposed, leading to turmoil in the underworld. Moving forward to the 1940s, one of these hitmen testified against Vito Genovese. While Genovese managed to evade conviction in that case involving poisoning, another hitman, whose testimony was insufficient, faced a different fate. His name was Ernie Rupolo, and he was found dead in 1964. Authorities tried to pin Rupolo's murder on Franzese, citing a conflict over racketeering and extortion. Witnesses supposedly heard Sonny ordering the hit on Rupolo and saw the murder take place. Determining who was lying and who was telling the truth in this case proved challenging. However, Franzese was eventually implicated. Rupolo left behind a wife named Eleanor, who later remarried a man named John Cordaro. Cordaro entered business partnerships with individuals like James Smith, Charles, and Garrett Parks in 19 Smith, Charles, and Garrett Parks in 19. They later claimed that Franzese personally met with them and gave instructions. During their testimony, the authorities sought to build a case against Sonny. However, there were glaring inconsistencies. The robbers, for instance, did not maintain their story consistently, and the defense argued that the authorities coerced them into implicating Sonny in exchange for leniency. It was unusual for the typically cautious Sonny, who usually issued orders through proxies, to directly involve himself with street-level guys. The trial lasted 5 weeks, with the prosecution painting Sonny as the mastermind behind numerous robberies. His formidable reputation likely deterred the robbers from speaking up earlier out of fear for their lives. The prosecution bolstered their case with Sonny's past charges, including kidnapping, murder, racketeering, and extortion. In response, the defense argued that the witnesses were unreliable criminals and drug addicts, which held some truth. Despite these arguments, the jury found Franzese guilty. Numerous appeals followed the verdict. Considering his extensive criminal record and the aggravating factors involved, Sonny received a lengthy sentence. Meanwhile, the robbers received much shorter terms, not exceeding 5 years. Sonny was incarcerated at Leavenworth Penitentiary, where FBI agents approached him immediately, offering a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation against the Colombo crime family. Sonny, however, refused the deal. In prison, Sonny quickly assumed a leadership role among fellow mobsters, navigating disputes and maintaining his status within the organization. Between handling business matters and spending time in his cell reading, Sonny remained a commanding presence. Outside the prison walls, drama unfolded as Sonny's adopted child sought legal avenues to secure his release. Despite spending heavily on lawyers and filing numerous appeals, they struggled to find a viable legal strategy, as previous court decisions favored execution and subsequent motions for reconsideration were consistently denied. Amidst this turmoil, Eleanor, the wife of the robber John Cordaro, who testified against Sonny, engaged in a heated altercation with her husband, during which she narrowly escaped serious harm. Upon learning of Eleanor's potential testimony, Michael swiftly dispatched a man to persuade her to change her statement regarding Cordaro and the others. After careful consideration, Eleanor agreed to cooperate, but she made a surprising decision. When the man approached her to negotiate, she revealed everything to him out of fear. The informant immediately informed the FBI, who initially doubted her sudden change of heart from being bribed to speak a certain way. Nevertheless, Eleanor persisted in seeking avenues to assist Sonny. She continued to advocate for his release, petitioning for an independent investigation into her husband's activities through the press. One journalist named Manny Topol corroborated her claims, highlighting Sonny's exemplary conduct in prison. Eventually, these efforts led to Sonny being released on parole, although probation violations due to associations with criminal entities periodically returned him to prison over the years. After his release, Sonny returned to his criminal enterprises, maintaining his businesses and continuing his involvement in organized crime. Despite occasional returns to jail due to probation violations linked to his associations, he resumed his operations. Notably, he worked at a Mazda dealership owned by his son, who later became known for his YouTube vlog, discussing Mafia history and related topics, much like his father in the Colombo family. Sonny's influence remained strong, and he was approached by Lombardo to assist with issues involving small-time racketeers. Sonny addressed the problem and involved his son Michael, who partnered with Lombardo in a scheme involving a gasoline tax scam. This scheme, detailed in my video on the Russian Mafia in the US, involved creating a wholesale company that sold gasoline to stations with the tax already factored into the price. The proceeds from the inflated prices were pocketed rather than remitted to the state, highlighting the continuation of Sonny's criminal activities. While Michael thrived in his criminal enterprises, particularly with the lucrative gasoline tax scam involving partnerships with Russian Mafia figures, his success came to an abrupt end when he received a 10-year prison sentence. This marked a significant blow for Sonny, who experienced one of the hardest hits of his life. Michael, facing serious charges, struck a deal with authorities to cooperate, which endangered him within the Colombo family. According to whistleblower Gregory Scarpa, the Colombo family initially intended to have Michael killed for his betrayal, orchestrated by Norby Walters, a family associate deeply involved in criminal activities. However, through Sonny's influence and negotiations with Carmine Persico, Michael's life was spared. In exchange, Michael agreed to relinquish a substantial portion of his amassed wealth from the gasoline scam, amounting to tens of millions of dollars. Throughout these turbulent times, Sonny continued his cycle of parole violations and intermittent returns to prison, maintaining his criminal operations. Meanwhile, his son John led a markedly different life. Resembling his father in appearance but contrasting in character, John struggled with severe drug addiction for years. He often resorted to stealing from his parents' home, leading to strained relationships and sporadic returns home when in need. Concerned for his well-being, his mother eventually intervened by placing him in rehab to address his addiction issues. After John's stint in rehab, his mother's gesture of giving him a new Jaguar was intended to support his fresh start. Unfortunately, John sold the car for a fraction of its value and embarked on a month-long binge. Despite these setbacks, his father gradually began involving him more in family business matters. John's commitment to sobriety strengthened over time. He stopped frequenting drug houses and focused on his responsibilities, particularly in collecting money and ensuring business owners paid their dues. However, his involvement almost led to tragedy during a violent internal conflict within the Colombo family. The conflict pitted boss Carmine Persico against his subordinate Vic Arena, who sought to seize power. Arena's supporters targeted John, intending to send a message and potentially eliminate him. Fortunately, John's cousin, also connected to the family, intervened and brokered a deal that spared his life. The conflict persisted until December 1992, when Arena was sentenced to life in prison, solidifying Persico's leadership. Despite tensions, Sonny, upon his release in 1994, focused on unifying the family. He organized meetings among captains to address lingering issues and foster unity after the turbulent period of internal strife. Despite John's struggles with addiction and his troubled past, Sonny remained a steadfast figure within the Mafia, upholding its principles without wavering. Despite numerous incarcerations and his continued involvement in criminal activities like extortion and murder, Sonny maintained his loyalty to Cosa Nostra. Interestingly, Sonny's commitment to the Mafia contrasted sharply with his second son, John, who ultimately became a government informant. In the 1990s, John fell back into drug addiction, spending nights in drug houses and stealing from family members while his father was in prison. Unable to cope alone, his mother faced challenges in managing John's behavior. John's downward spiral culminated in his arrest while under the influence in an unregistered vehicle. He pleaded guilty and received a 1-year jail sentence. During his time behind bars, John reflected deeply on his life choices. Eventually, he made a significant decision to cooperate with the FBI, a rare choice among those deeply involved in organized crime. Cooperating with the authorities is usually met with skepticism and often results in rejection. However, John's willingness to meet with FBI agents signaled a pivotal shift in his life trajectory. Despite his deep involvement in crime, Sonny remained a figure of loyalty within the Mafia, even mentoring individuals like Gaetano Furtado, who became like a son to him after John's betrayal. Sonny imparted his extensive criminal knowledge to Furtado, teaching him everything from disposing of bodies to intimidation tactics, sharing stories of his own life and experiences, including the numerous people he had killed. Ironically, Furtado, whom Sonny trusted deeply, turned out to be an informant as well. Unbeknownst to Sonny, his conversations with Furtado were recorded, capturing all his candid advice and stories. This twist of fate underscored Sonny's iconic status in the underworld, a mobster who never cooperated with authorities, finding himself surrounded by informants and deals made against him. Sonny's life was marked by contradictions. While he upheld Mafia principles and evaded law enforcement for decades, his trust in those close to him was ultimately exploited, leading to unforeseen betrayals. The story of John Sonny Franzese is indeed a dramatic tale of Mafia life and family betrayals. At over 90 years old, Sonny faced another trial for racketeering and extortion, where testimonies from his son John and Gaetano Furtado, whom he mentored, contributed to his conviction. The sight of a nonagenarian facing such charges added a surreal dimension to the courtroom drama, especially with his own son testifying against him. Despite expectations that he would spend his final days in prison, Sonny was released in 2017, becoming the oldest federal inmate at the time. He spent his remaining years in a nursing home where he reportedly expressed forgiveness towards his family and advised his grandchildren to stay away from a life of crime. Sonny Franzese's life encapsulates the complexities of loyalty, betrayal, and the harsh realities of organized crime. His legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of choosing a life of crime and the impacts it can have on both oneself and future generations. If you enjoyed the story of the enigmatic Sonny Franzese, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more gripping tales from history's underworld. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for watching.